Do you remember those everyday things from the 1980s, the ones so normal then but shocking to imagine now? These things shaped childhood, school, and family life in ways we barely questioned at the time. What does it say about us that ordinary life could feel so reckless today? In the 1980s, you could walk into any diner or pancake house and be hit immediately by the haze of cigarette smoke. Families sat together eating stacks of pancakes, while just a booth away, strangers puffed cigarettes between bites of bacon and eggs. The restaurant might have had a smoking section, but the invisible wall of air between smoking and non-smoking tables did nothing. Ashtrays were on every table, filled to the brim by the end of a meal. Waitresses carried trays of food in one hand and cleared half-full ashtrays in the other, balancing the smell of fresh coffee with the sting of secondhand smoke. Parents smoked casually while children colored on placemats, and nobody raised an eyebrow. Even fast food places were not immune. McDonald's had ashtrays on its tables, so Happy Meals often came with the faint smell of Marlboros. Families just accepted that eating out meant leaving with the scent of smoke clinging to their hair and clothes. Today, the idea of lighting up inside a crowded restaurant feels unimaginable, even offensive. But in the 1980s, it was considered normal, polite even, to ask, "Smoking or non?" Do you remember finishing your pancakes while a stranger at the next table flicked ash into an overflowing tray? In the 1980s, parents thought nothing of leaving kids home alone for hours. The only safety net was an emergency number written on the fridge, usually a neighbor, a relative, or the police station. Kids were told to lock the doors, stay inside, and maybe order a pizza if they got hungry. There were no cell phones, no text check-ins, and no quick ways to reach parents. If something went wrong, kids had to walk to a payphone or hope the house phone still worked. In most cases, nothing happened, and parents came home to find kids watching television or sprawled on the floor with toys. It was a rite of passage to be trusted at home alone. Younger kids bragged about it, while older siblings carried the heavy responsibility of babysitting for an entire evening. Sometimes things went wrong, a burnt dinner, a broken lamp, or a power outage, but those moments were shrugged off as part of growing up. Today, leaving children alone without constant phone contact can even lead to legal trouble. Looking back, it is astonishing how much independence parents once handed to their kids without hesitation. Do you remember sitting in a quiet house, the only lifeline being a phone number taped to the fridge? On hot summer days in the 1980s, nothing tasted better or stranger than water from the garden hose. The first gush was hot and rubbery, but kids waited for the cool rush that followed. Friends lined up in driveways, passing the hose from one mouth to the next without a thought about germs. Parents encouraged it, telling kids to stay outside rather than track dirt into the kitchen for a glass. The hose was easier, faster, and always available. Even the family dog drank from it, lapping at the stream in between the kids' turns. It was more than just a drink, it was part of summer itself. The taste of hose water became so familiar that many people still recall it decades later, a mix of plastic and grass that was strangely refreshing. Nobody worried about bacteria, chemicals, or plastics leaching into the water. Today, drinking from a hose feels unsafe, even unthinkable, with warnings about lead, germs, and sanitation. But back then, it was the symbol of carefree childhood summers. Do you remember that first cool sip after the hot water cleared, the taste of freedom on a sweltering afternoon? In the 1980s, bikes were freedom, and helmets were practically unheard of. Kids flew down steep hills, popped wheelies in the street, and raced through traffic with the wind in their faces and no protection at all. A crash meant a scraped knee, not a trip to the emergency room. Parents rarely insisted on safety gear. Helmets were for motocross racers or kids with overly cautious parents, not for the everyday rider. Packs of children roamed neighborhoods like little gangs on wheels, daring each other to go faster, higher, or farther. Sometimes kids tied ropes to their bikes and dragged friends on skateboards or roller skates, laughing until someone wiped out. Gravel-strewn streets tore into bare knees, leaving scars that became badges of honor. Even when crashes ended in tears, kids were back on their bikes the very next day. crashes were inevitable. Kids went over handlebars, skidded across gravel, and sometimes limped home with torn clothes and bloody elbows. But it was part of the adventure, a badge of honor to show up the next day with bandages and stories. Today, helmets and reflectors are mandatory in most places, and parents would never dream of letting kids ride unprotected. Looking back, it is shocking how casually kids once flew through neighborhoods with nothing but hope keeping them safe. Do you remember bombing down a hill? No helmet, no lights, just the rush of speed? Before cell phones, payphones were everywhere in the 1980s. They stood on busy streets, in gas stations, at malls, and outside grocery stores, metal booths with grimy receivers that thousands of strangers had pressed to their ears. Dropping a quarter into the slot was the sound of connection. Kids used them to call parents for rides, teenagers called friends late at night, and adults lined up in airports to make long-distance calls home. Phone books hung from chains, their pages curled and worn, offering every number you needed. Receivers were sticky from constant use, and many smelled faintly of cigarettes or perfume. Some booths were covered in graffiti, etched with initials or phone numbers passed around like secrets. Kids often dared each other to prank call strangers, racing out of the booth before anyone could catch them. The booths themselves became symbols of everyday life. People ducked inside during rainstorms, cupping the receiver to block the noise of traffic. Sometimes kids prank-called strangers, laughing as they ran away before the operator could trace it. Today, payphones are almost extinct, relics of another time. Looking back, it is strange to think of how public and communal making a phone call once was. Do you remember the cold feel of the receiver and the smell of cigarette smoke as you tried to make a call in a noisy booth? Cars in the 1980s came standard with ashtrays and built-in cigarette lighters. Smoking while driving was so common that it was expected, and every family car carried the smell of tobacco in its seats and upholstery. Parents lit cigarettes with kids in the back seat, the windows rolled up, smoke swirling in the air. Ashtrays filled with butts during long road trips, and the faint glow of a lit cigarette was as familiar as the radio playing classic rock. Nobody thought twice about it. Some kids pressed the cigarette lighter just to watch the red coil glow, branding holes into car mats or even seats. Ashtrays often overflowed, with ashes spilling into cup holders and onto the floor. Even the smell of a brand new car quickly disappeared under layers of stale smoke. Even non-smokers grew accustomed to the smell. Friends piled into cars and accepted that a ride meant breathing in a haze of tobacco. The cigarette lighter itself doubled as a toy for curious kids who sometimes burned holes in upholstery with its red-hot coil. Today, the idea of smoking in a car with children inside is shocking, even illegal in some places. Looking back, it is incredible how normalized it once was. Do you remember the glowing tip of a cigarette lighting up a dark car ride at night? Playgrounds in the 1980s were built from metal, not plastic. The tallest slides were shining steel towers that heated up under the summer sun until they were hot enough to burn skin. Kids lined up anyway, squealing as they slid down and felt the sting on the backs of their legs. Parents laughed, telling kids to wear jeans if they wanted to avoid burns. But most wore shorts, so sliding meant a quick yelp followed by a run to the swings. Nobody saw it as dangerous, it was just part of playground life. Monkey bars stood tall over asphalt, daring kids to climb higher than they should. Merry-go-rounds spun until children flew off into the dirt, sometimes landing hard enough to cry but still running back for another turn. Even seesaws were treacherous, slamming kids into the ground when the other rider jumped off suddenly. The slides were taller, steeper, and faster than the plastic ones today. Kids flew off the bottom into the dirt, tumbling before they scrambled back up the ladder for another turn. Injuries happened, but they were brushed off with a pat on the back and a reminder to be tougher next time. Today, playgrounds are padded and built with safety in mind. Looking back, it is wild to think of kids willingly climbing steel towers in the blazing sun. Do you remember the smell of hot metal and the sting of sliding too soon on a summer day? Public pools in the 1980s often operated with a simple sign, "Swim at your own risk." Parents dropped kids off with towels and snacks, confident they would manage the day without supervision. Children cannonballed into deep ends, raced each other across lanes, and roughhoused on diving boards without a lifeguard watching. If something went wrong, older kids or nearby adults jumped in to help. It was chaotic, but everyone accepted the risk. Games like who can hold their breath the longest often turned dangerous, but no one intervened unless something looked serious. Diving boards launched kids into the water without spotters, leading to more than a few belly flops and collisions. Snack bars sold sodas and candy, fueling the wild energy of a pool packed with unsupervised children. The absence of authority felt like freedom. Pools were noisy, splash-filled, and sometimes dangerous, but they were the centerpiece of summer. The smell of chlorine and the sound of laughter were enough to keep kids coming back day after day. Today, liability laws make unsupervised pools nearly impossible. Looking back, it is amazing how casually families treated water safety. Do you remember plunging into the pool, fully aware no lifeguard was on duty? In the mid-1980s, milk cartons became a chilling part of breakfast. Alongside your cereal, you stared at photos of missing children printed on the side. Families poured milk over their Cheerios while scanning the faces of kids who had vanished, hoping someone might recognize them. It was one of the first national awareness campaigns for child abductions. Parents talked about it at breakfast tables, and kids grew up with the unsettling reminder that children just like them could disappear. Some families clipped the photos and kept them by the phone just in case. For kids, it was confusing. One moment you were eating cornflakes, the next you were staring at the smiling face of a child labeled missing. It blended the innocence of breakfast with the fear of real-world dangers. Today, awareness campaigns live online or through Amber Alerts, but the milk carton photos are remembered as stark symbols of the 1980s. Looking back, it is haunting how something as simple as breakfast carried such heavy reminders. Do you remember sitting at the table, wondering what had happened to the faces staring back at you from the carton? In the 1980s, back seats were wide-open spaces. Families piled into station wagons, with kids sprawled across the bench or bouncing in the cargo area. Seat belts dangled unused, often buried beneath the seats, forgotten. Road trips were noisy chaos. Kids leaned out windows, played games across laps, or even napped lying flat on the floor. Nobody insisted on buckling up because the culture had not yet accepted seatbelts as a necessity. Parents smoked, music blasted, and kids tumbled around as the car sped down highways. Accidents happened, but most people shrugged them off as bad luck rather than a lack of safety precautions. Today, failing to strap kids in can lead to fines and charges, and children ride strapped tightly in booster seats. Looking back, it is shocking how casually families once barreled down highways with kids bouncing around inside the car. Do you remember lying in the back seat, staring out the rear window at the stars during a late-night drive? In the 1980s, every kid knew the secret to fixing a broken video game cartridge: blow into it. Atari, then Nintendo, both suffered from temperamental cartridges that refused to load. Children yanked the game out, gave it a dramatic puff of air, then jammed it back in with hope in their eyes. And more often than not, the game actually worked. It became ritual. Friends crowded around the television, waiting for the pixelated screen to appear. If the first blow did not work, the cartridge got another, maybe accompanied by a shake or a light slam against a knee. Nobody knew the science, but the legend lived on. Parents rolled their eyes, but even they joined in when Pac-Man or Mario refused to load. Dusty cartridges sat stacked by the console, ready for the next round of tinkering. Over time, kids developed whole systems: angle the cartridge, blow gently or fiercely, tap the side before inserting. Today, we know the blowing trick often did more harm than good, introducing moisture instead of removing dust. But back then, it felt like a miracle fix, an act of gaming magic. Do you remember leaning over a cartridge, cheeks puffed, praying your favorite game would come back to life? Step into an office building in the 1980s, and the first thing you noticed was the haze. Cigarette smoke drifted across cubicles, lingering in boardrooms and break areas. Ashtrays sat on desks next to typewriters and phones, filled to the brim by mid-morning. Managers smoked during meetings, flicking ashes into glass trays as employees took notes. Secretaries answered phones while balancing cigarettes between fingers. Coffee breaks were cigarette breaks, with whole groups gathering in hallways to light up together. The smell clung to everything: papers, clothes, even computers. By lunchtime, the office air felt thick, stale, and heavy, but nobody complained. It was simply workplace culture, and smoke breaks were considered part of the daily rhythm. Today, smoking indoors is unimaginable, banned by law in most places. But in the 1980s, smoke-filled offices were a defining part of the workday. Do you remember walking through an office where the fog of cigarettes was as much a fixture as the filing cabinets? For suburban families in the 1980s, nothing said status quite like a waterbed. Heavy, sloshing mattresses sat on wooden frames, marketed as the height of luxury and comfort. Couples bragged about them, teens begged for them, and furniture stores devoted entire sections to showing them off. The appeal was simple. The water shifted with your every move, creating a floating sensation. Ads promised better sleep, fewer aches, and a touch of romance. But the reality was often messier. Beds leaked, heaters failed, and moving one was a nightmare. Still, waterbeds were everywhere. Kids jumped on them despite warnings, fascinated by the waves they created. Friends who slept over bragged the next day about the strange, wobbly experience. They became a suburban obsession, more style than practicality. Today, waterbeds have all but disappeared, remembered mostly as a fad. Looking back, it is wild to think how many houses once had a giant plastic sack of water sitting in the master bedroom. Do you remember the sloshing sound as you rolled over on a hot summer night? In the 1980s, kids as young as 10 managed entire paper routes. They woke before sunrise, loaded stacks of newspapers into canvas bags, and pedaled their bikes through quiet neighborhoods. The sound of tires on wet pavement was part of dawn itself. Parents rarely accompanied them. Responsibility was part of the deal, and kids learned quickly how to balance heavy loads while steering. Dogs barked, sprinklers sprayed, and newspapers sometimes landed in puddles, but the job got done. It was more than work. It was independence. Kids collected payments door to door, often in cash, learning how to count change and deal with cranky customers. For many, it was their first job, the first taste of earning their own money. Today, paper routes are largely gone, replaced by adults in cars. Looking back, it is incredible how much trust and responsibility parents once placed on children. Do you remember stuffing papers into bags and racing the sunrise to finish your deliveries? Before every household had a remote control, kids were the remotes. Parents barked, "Change the channel," and children got up, turned the dial, and fiddled with the antenna until the picture cleared. It was a universal experience. Saturday nights meant kids sitting on the floor while parents relaxed, issuing orders to adjust volume or switch stations. The youngest often got stuck with the job, sprinting back and forth between sofa and screen. Televisions had only a handful of channels, but flipping between them was a family activity, done manually, one dial click at a time. Kids sometimes tried to sneak in their own choice, but parents noticed instantly. Arguments flared, but the dial kept turning. Today, streaming services and sleek remotes put everything at our fingertips. Looking back, it is funny to think entire generations once acted as walking, talking remote controls. Do you remember being ordered to stand by the television, hand on the knob, ready for the next command? In the 1980s, the goal was not just a tan, it was the darkest tan possible. People slathered baby oil on their skin, then stretched out under the sun, literally frying themselves for hours. The glisten was a badge of honor, proof of dedication to the perfect bronze. Sunscreen was ignored, even mocked. Friends compared tans like trophies, bragging about who had the deepest color by the end of summer. Sunburns were treated with aloe and laughter, shrugged off as the price of beauty. Magazines encouraged it, showing celebrities with flawless tans. Beaches and backyards were filled with sunbathers armed with towels, radios, and bottles of baby oil. Wrinkles, burns, and long-term damage were not considered. Today, we know the dangers, and tanning culture has shifted towards sprays, lotions, and SPF protection. Looking back, it is shocking how casually people risked their skin. Do you remember lying under the sun, shimmering with oil, waiting for your skin to darken? Every home in the 1980s had at least one rotary phone, often with a cord that stretched across entire rooms. Privacy meant dragging the receiver into the hallway or stretching the cord into a closet, twisting yourself around as the cord tangled. Dialing itself took time. Each number clicked slowly as the dial spun back, forcing patience in every call. Mistakes meant starting over from the beginning. Families fought over phone time, with teenagers hogging the line for hours. Parents banged on doors, demanding their turn, while younger siblings eavesdropped on whispered conversations. The sound of a busy signal haunted households. Today, cordless phones and cell phones make calls effortless. Looking back, it is amazing how much effort went into a simple conversation. Do you remember twisting a cord around your finger while trying to talk privately in a noisy house? In the 1980s, parents thought nothing of leaving kids in the car while running errands. Windows cracked, doors locked, and instructions to stay put were enough. Children sat in back seats, fiddling with knobs or climbing over benches while parents shopped inside for half an hour. It was routine. Grocery store parking lots were filled with cars holding restless kids, some pressed against windows waiting for parents to return. Nobody called the police or considered it neglect. It was simply convenience. For children, it was boring or thrilling depending on imagination. Some played games, others fought with siblings, and a few even pretended to drive by turning the steering wheel. Today, leaving kids in a car unattended can lead to arrests. Looking back, it is astonishing how casually parents once assumed kids would be fine waiting alone. Do you remember sitting in a hot car, watching strangers walk by, hoping your parents would hurry up? McDonald's and other fast food chains in the 1980s had playgrounds that were equal parts fun and dangerous. Metal jungle gyms baked in the sun, leaving burns on children's skin. Tall slides and spinning contraptions sent kids crashing into each other with little thought to safety. Parents sat inside eating burgers while kids played unsupervised. Climbing structures reached risky heights, and falls onto hard ground were common. Bruises, burns, and even broken bones were brushed off as part of playtime. The equipment was colorful and inviting, but rarely padded or protected. Kids loved it anyway, returning again and again despite the risks. Today, playgrounds are padded, regulated, and designed with safety in mind. Looking back, it is amazing how dangerous fast food playgrounds once were. Do you remember climbing through metal tubes that felt like ovens in the summer heat? In the 1980s, kids skated on concrete driveways and streets with no helmets, no pads, and no worries. Tricks were done bareheaded, falls meant bloody knees, and concussions went largely unnoticed. Skating was freedom. Kids raced down driveways, grinding curbs, and launching themselves off makeshift ramps. Parents cheered from porches or ignored it completely. Injuries were shrugged off with bandages and high fives. The culture valued toughness over caution. Protective gear was seen as unnecessary, even embarrassing. Friends compared scars and bruises like trophies, each one proof of daring. Today, helmets and pads are standard, often legally required. Looking back, it is shocking how casually kids once risked serious injury. Do you remember flying off a skateboard and rolling across asphalt, laughing even as you scraped yourself raw? Flying in the 1980s meant stepping into a cloud of stale smoke before the plane even left the ground. Ashtrays were built directly into the armrests, tiny metal trays that clinked as passengers tapped ashes into them. The no smoking sign flickered on and off, but there were always sections where people lit up freely. And in a pressurized cabin, the smoke never stayed confined. It drifted everywhere. Passengers chain-smoked through long flights, turning the air thick and heavy. The recycled ventilation only made things worse, circulating secondhand smoke until the entire cabin smelled like a dirty ashtray. Parents sat with children just a seat away from strangers puffing through packs of cigarettes. Even meals came with the haze of smoke lingering above the trays. Flight attendants had to work in it, smiling as they served coffee to passengers blowing smoke right in their faces. Some even balanced trays of food with one hand while emptying overfilled ashtrays with the other. The mix of coffee, food, and cigarette smoke became the defining scent of air travel. Back then, it was considered normal. People accepted smoke-filled cabins the same way they accepted turbulence or cramped seats. It was just part of flying. Complaints were rare, and non-smokers had little choice but to endure it. Today, the thought of someone lighting up mid-flight feels outrageous, even laughable. But for anyone who flew in the 1980s, those glowing cigarette tips in a dark cabin are a memory that lingers. Do you remember opening that ashtray in the armrest, knowing it would never truly smell clean? In the 1980s, classrooms dimmed their lights for lessons about safety, and the projector clattered to life with film strips about stranger danger. The reels were grainy, the voices monotone, and the music strangely eerie. Children sat wide-eyed as cartoon figures and actors warned about strangers with candy or the man in the van. The film strips often came with catchy jingles that stuck in kids' heads for weeks. "Say no and run away" was drilled into them with eerie enthusiasm. Teachers paused the film to explain the dangers of talking to strangers, sometimes adding their own chilling stories of what could happen. For many children, it was their first introduction to fear. A walk to school suddenly felt like a gauntlet of invisible threats. Even the simplest gesture from an adult, offering directions or saying hello, became suspicious. The lessons were meant to keep kids safe, but they also left behind a permanent unease. The equipment itself added to the strangeness. The whir of the projector, the click as slides advanced, the occasional jam that froze a distorted image on the screen, all made the message feel surreal, almost dreamlike. Kids left the classroom repeating the warnings, nervous but obedient. Today, safety lessons come through interactive programs or digital campaigns. Looking back, those old film strips feel both primitive and haunting. Do you remember the flicker of the projector casting shadows while a jingle about strangers echoed through your classroom? In the 1980s, seeing people riding in the back of pickup trucks was as common as seeing kids on bikes. Families piled into truck beds for trips to the beach, church picnics, or even errands across town. On weekends, highways looked like rolling parades, with kids laughing and waving from the open backs of trucks. It was the kind of freedom only children of that era knew. The wind whipped through hair, and the bumpy ride turned every corner into a thrill. Kids sat on the tailgate, legs dangling dangerously close to the road, while others sprawled out flat, staring at the sky as the world sped by. Parents thought nothing of it. Pickup trucks were part of everyday life, especially in rural and suburban areas, and letting kids ride in the bed was simply practical. Sometimes entire groups of teenagers hitched rides this way, piling in after school or games, their voices rising over the roar of the engine. Of course, it was risky. A sudden stop could send passengers flying, and serious accidents did happen. But in the culture of the time, those risks were overlooked in favor of convenience and fun. It was just how things were done. Today, riding in truck beds is illegal in many places, banned for safety reasons. But the memory of cruising under the stars in the back of a pickup remains vivid for those who lived it. Do you remember clutching the side of a truck bed, laughing as the wind rushed past? In the 1980s, the arcade was the heartbeat of teenage life. Neon lights flickered, machines beeped and buzzed, and kids lined up with pockets stuffed full of quarters. The jingling sound of coins was the soundtrack of every Saturday afternoon, as allowances disappeared one game at a time. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Galaga, Pinball. Each machine was a portal to another world. Teenagers crowded around the best players, cheering them on as high scores blinked on the screen. The more quarters you had, the longer you could stay in the game, and running out meant waiting for payday. The arcade was also a social hub. Friendships formed over shared machines, rivalries flared in pinball competitions, and entire groups hung out for hours in the glow of the cabinets. Even the smell, the mix of popcorn, soda, and overheated circuits, became part of the experience. Parents dropped kids off and trusted them to spend the day there, safe among the flashing lights. Quarters were collected in cups, stacked neatly on machines to reserve a turn. Losing quickly meant your money was gone in seconds, but that was part of the thrill. Today, arcades are rare, replaced by home consoles and online gaming. Looking back, it is striking how much teenage life once revolved around quarters and glowing cabinets. Do you remember the weight of coins in your pocket and the buzz of a joystick as Pac-Man devoured dots? In the 1980s, wallets bulged with bills and coins. Debit cards were rare, and credit cards were not widely accepted in everyday stores. Cash was king, and everyone carried it. Folded bills, jingling quarters, and stacks of change for vending machines and arcade games. Shopping trips meant peeling bills from a thick wallet or handing over exact change counted carefully from a coin purse. Cash registers rang loudly as drawers opened and clerks punched in totals by hand. Kids learned math through cash transactions, counting out quarters for candy or trading dollar bills for toys. Even big purchases were often made in cash. Furniture, appliances, even used cars were bought with envelopes of money handed over on the spot. Banks were busy places with long lines at tellers and constant trips to the ATM for withdrawals. Cash also carried its own risks. Losing your wallet meant losing everything, and parents warned kids to keep their money tucked away. Still, the feel of paper bills and clinking coins was part of daily life, something tangible that tied people to their purchases. Today, cash is fading, replaced by cards, apps, and digital wallets. Looking back, it is amazing how much weight people once carried in their pockets just to get through the day. Do you remember the satisfying feel of handing over a crumpled bill and hearing the clink of coins as change dropped into your hand? The local train tracks were not on any map of attractions, but they might as well have been your Saturday headquarters. Dad would pull up to that familiar patch of gravel beside the crossing, engine off, thermos in hand. Steam curled from the lid as he poured black coffee like he was settling in for a movie. You sat on the hood, knees pulled up, eyes scanning the horizon. Then, clack, clack, clack. The first rumbles came. A distant whistle echoed across the fields, and the train rolled in, all muscle and thunder. Dad would nod like he timed it himself, and the counting began. 1, 2, 3. Boxcar after boxcar, faded logos, rust streaks, some tagged with graffiti from cities you had never seen. Sometimes you brought a notebook, sometimes just your eyes, but you always left with the same question. Where were they all going? Dad would lean back against the car, sip his coffee, and tell you a story that may or may not have been true. It did not matter. What mattered was the rhythm, the waiting, the wonder. And if you were lucky, the next stop was just as legendary. A miniature golf course where no obstacle was regulation, and every putt told a story. Trapper keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. Homemade school lunches in washed-out containers were the unofficial lunchbox of every frugal family. Forget the cartoon thermos or the shiny metal lunch pail. If you were poor in the 1980s, your sandwich came wrapped in wax paper and packed in an empty margarine tub. Maybe the lid said country crock, but inside was leftover spaghetti or peanut butter crackers. You used the same container every day. The label peeled, the edges warped, but it worked. Your drink? Not a juice box. Maybe a reused jelly jar with watered-down Kool-Aid. You prayed it did not leak. In the lunchroom, you sat next to kids with perfectly packed snacks, cheese sticks, pudding cups, chips with real logos. You ate quietly, or fast, or not at all. But at home, it made sense. Those containers stacked neatly in the cupboard. Your parents washed them each night and packed them again with care. It was not about shame. It was about stretching every cent. And even though you knew it was different, you also knew it was made with effort, maybe even love. Those stained lids and handwritten notes stuffed under the sandwich were signs of sacrifice. And now, all grown up, they feel like something you miss. You could hear it before you saw it, that cheerful blip-blip melody echoing from a darkened corner of the local arcade. Then you saw the screen. A little yellow circle with a hungry mouth chased ghosts in a neon maze, and just like that, the world changed. Pac-Man was more than a game. It was a full-blown epidemic. Kids skipped lunch to play it. Parents dropped quarters like candy. Radio stations played songs about it. There were t-shirts, breakfast cereals, and even a cartoon series. It was not just fun. It was addictive. And it did something almost no other game had done before. It welcomed everyone. You did not have to be into space battles or dragons. You just had to know how to move and survive. Simple. Genius. And for many, unforgettable. Pac-Man became the face of a new era, a digital era. The 1980s were the first time video games truly felt like culture, and this chomping little pixel creature led the way. As consoles took over and arcades faded, Pac-Man lost his spotlight. But the mark he left was permanent. He taught us that a game could be more than entertainment. It could be identity. When was the last time a circle made the whole world spin? You could not miss it. There were no signs, no trails, and definitely no cell reception. Not that it mattered. The hidden fishing hole Dad always took you to might as well have been a secret passed down through generations. You had to park on a dirt shoulder, hop a barbed wire fence, and walk through brush that snagged at your socks like it wanted you to turn back. But then, there it was. A quiet patch of water framed by trees and pure silence. No people, just frogs, the buzz of dragonflies, and the occasional splash of something just out of sight. Dad would hand you a rod, already rigged, and say, "Let's see if they're biting today," like it was a ritual. He always had a story about the one that got away, usually involving a fish the size of your leg and a broken line. You never saw it, but you believed him. And on the days you did catch something, even if it was just a bluegill the size of a cookie, he would hoot and holler like you had just pulled up Moby Dick. You would sit there side by side, quiet except for the occasional snack or Dad humming an old tune. But if you want to hear about the reward after a good fishing trip, let me take you to the drive-through dairy farm. Glass bottles, cold milk, and maybe even ice cream. Over-the-top hairdos in the 1980s were less about style and more about spectacle. To get that perfect towering poof or side-swept shell, you needed a can of hairspray in one hand and a teasing comb in the other. Some mornings, the bathroom turned into a construction site. Hair was sprayed, scrunched, fluffed, and frozen into place like a sculpture that dared not move. Mousse was slathered on like sunscreen, followed by heat from a curling iron so hot it could leave permanent dents in your bangs. It was a daily battle between gravity and vanity usually won. The bigger the hair, the closer to cool. Class photos from the decade show clouds of bangs, mile-high ponytails, and helmets of blonde that could survive a wind tunnel. Everyone walked around smelling faintly of aerosol. Some kids were practically flammable. But at the time, it was worth it. You judged your popularity by the size of your bangs. A flat head was social suicide. Looking back now, it seems absurd. But for those who lived it, there was no higher compliment than being told your hair looked totally rad. Limited access to cable television in the 1980s meant your world came through rabbit ears. You had the basics, network channels, maybe a grainy local station or two. But when friends talked about Nickelodeon, MTV, or the Disney Channel, you just smiled and nodded, pretending you knew what they meant. Your TV had an antenna wrapped in aluminum foil. Your Saturday mornings were for cartoons on the few channels that came in clear. You learned to adjust the rabbit ears just right, then sit perfectly still, because moving even an inch might send the screen back into static. You missed out on the cable exclusive shows, the big movie nights, the flashy channels with round-the-clock music videos. You got public access, reruns, and news that ended with the national anthem. At school, you heard about shows you never saw. You laughed along anyway. At home, you made the most of what you had. Limited channels meant fewer choices, but also fewer arguments. You watched whatever was on. You made it work. And you learned something strange. When there was only one option, it often became your favorite. The picture was not perfect, but it was yours. And sometimes, that was enough. Madonna was not asking for permission. She was taking space. Big space. Space no woman had dared occupy quite like that before. When Like a Virgin hit the airwaves, it was not just a pop song. It was a dare, a mirror, a cultural detonation. In the 1980s, Madonna redefined what a woman in music could be. She was sexual, smart, and unapologetically loud. Her fashion made people stare. Lace gloves, layered crucifixes, fishnet tights. Every girl in the mall tried to look like her. Every parent feared she would corrupt their daughters. But Madonna was not just style. She was a movement, feminine, brash, and powerful. She broke the rules because the rules were not made for her. She made pop music into protest. Every hit came with controversy, and every outfit carried a message. Over time, people forgot that Madonna was not always accepted. She fought her way into the spotlight, and in doing so, she lit the path for every female artist who followed. Today, when boldness feels choreographed, it is easy to forget when it was dangerous. Madonna made that danger feel like freedom. When did we decide women had to behave to be respected? The all-you-can-fit junkyard was not a store. It was a scavenger hunt with tetanus on the side. Dad would wear his work pants, which meant they had oil stains older than you were, and he would grab a wrench like he was Indiana Jones about to head into the temple. The guy at the front desk waved him through like an old friend. "Take whatever you can carry," he said, and Dad took that as a challenge. Rows and rows of sun-bleached cars with their guts spilled out, broken washing machines, and lawn mowers that had definitely seen war. Dad would pop a hood, grunt like he found treasure, and climb inside the thing like he was becoming one with it. Meanwhile, you were busy poking through the wreckage and came across something unforgettable, an actual raccoon skull. No idea how it got there. You just knew it was going in your backpack. At some point, Dad would emerge, sweaty and victorious, holding a car mirror or some hose that just needed a clean. It was less about the parts and more about the hunt. And when the sun started setting and he said, "We've got time for one more stop," you hoped it would be the fishing hole, the one no one else knew about. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow, that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut, do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. The screen flickered. You blew into the cartridge, and suddenly, magic. The Nintendo Entertainment System was not just a console, it was a resurrection. In the early 1980s, the video game industry had crashed hard. Too many bad games, too little trust. Then came Nintendo, sleek, gray, and unforgettable. It brought discipline back to design, quality back to gameplay, and joy back to living rooms. Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Duck Hunt. These were not just games, they were rituals. You did not play them, you lived them. The music stuck in your head, the secrets whispered on playgrounds, the hours you spent mastering pixel-perfect jumps. Nintendo created a language kids shared across the country, a shared dreamscape. It made nerds into heroes, siblings into teammates, and parents into confused spectators. And even today, the nostalgia runs deep. But it all started here, with a console that revived an industry and raised a generation. There was no internet, no patches, no downloads. Just you, the screen, and a controller with two buttons that somehow felt like a key to another world. When did play stop feeling like a portal? Shared bedrooms among siblings meant privacy was a myth and bedtime was an adventure. 2, sometimes 3 kids in one room, bunk beds, fold-out couches, mattresses on the floor. You learned to sleep through snoring, giggling, and whispered arguments over who stole the blanket. One lamp lit the room. One drawer held everyone's socks. If you wanted quiet, you closed your eyes and hoped for sleep. But there was love there too. Late-night stories, secret jokes, a flashlight under the covers. You made forts out of sheets and built walls with pillows, pretending they were rooms of your own. You learned to share without thinking, to wait your turn, to keep secrets. Sure, you fought. You drew invisible lines down the mattress. But you also looked out for each other, listened when someone cried, celebrated the nights when no one got in trouble. Those cramped quarters built closeness you never asked for, but maybe needed. And years later, you remembered those rooms not for the lack of space, but for the way they held you together. Shared bedrooms were loud, messy, and full of life. And even now, you sometimes miss what it meant to fall asleep beside someone who knew you by heart. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music, they were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. The county auction barn was chaotic, dusty, and loud, and Dad loved every minute of it. From the second you stepped inside, it was a sensory overload. Wooden pens clucked with chickens, bleated with goats, and somewhere a sheep was loudly objecting to something. The auctioneer stood on a platform, voice rising and falling like a song only locals understood. He had his bidding number tucked into his shirt pocket and a mental budget that always magically doubled if the right box came along. There were tables of mystery items, rusty tools, mismatched Tupperware, bundles of wire, and once a broken vending machine that Dad swore he could fix. $10? That's a steal, he would whisper, just before being outbid by the same guy who always bid too high. You did not win much. But when Dad did walk out with something, it was like he had climbed Everest. And even when he lost, he laughed all the way home. The auction was not about getting stuff, it was about the thrill. But when he wanted a guaranteed win, all he needed was a firehouse griddle, a bottle of syrup, and a pancake breakfast made by heroes. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Using public transportation exclusively meant your life moved on someone else's schedule. There was no jumping in the car for milk, no last-minute rides. You waited. At bus stops, on corners, in the rain, in the cold, in your Sunday best or your work shoes. The bus was never early. Sometimes it was late. But you waited. You held a pocket full of exact change. Maybe a transfer stub. You knew the routes like the back of your hand. You sat near the front if you were tired, in the back if you did not want to talk. You watched strangers argue, laugh, cry. You saw your city from a different view, block by block, stop by stop. Owning a car seemed like another world. Gas, insurance, repairs. Those were luxuries. The bus was what you had, and it was enough, sort of. It got you to school, to work, to church. You learned to carry groceries in bags that would not break. You made friends with the drivers. You memorized delays. And when the ride was over, you stepped off into whatever came next. Public transportation did not just move you. It taught you patience, resilience, and how to hold on when the brakes hit hard. Michael Jackson did not just release an album. He changed the atmosphere. Thriller was not music. It was lightning caught in vinyl. From the moment that beat hit and Vincent Price whispered his haunted verse, you knew you were in a different world. Released in 1982, Thriller became more than the best-selling album of all time. It became the measuring stick for what pop music could be. The music video? It was a short film. Zombies, red jackets, moonwalks. It was terrifying, brilliant, and utterly unforgettable. And it proved that music could be cinematic, a full-body experience. Jackson's blend of pop, rock, and funk was daring, but his visuals were what made him immortal. He did not just perform, he possessed the stage. Every kid on the block tried the lean. Every radio played the album front to back. And when he danced on that sidewalk, the whole world watched. But over time, we stopped seeing just how big this moment was. Today's music feels disposable by comparison. Fast, shallow, forgettable. Thriller was not just a pop album. It was the last time the whole planet danced to the same rhythm. When did we stop making music that haunted us, in the best way? Hand-me-down clothing told a story stitched in faded colors and stretched-out sleeves. In homes where money was tight, new clothes were a luxury reserved for Christmas or growth spurts too dramatic to ignore. Everything else? Hand-me-downs, jeans worn thin at the knees, shirts a size too big, coats that smelled like someone else's winter. You learned to cuff sleeves and roll pant legs. You got good at pretending it was your style all along. Sometimes it came from older siblings, sometimes from cousins or neighbors. There was no shame at home, it was just life. But at school it was different. Kids noticed. They asked where you got it. Or worse, they recognized it from someone else's closet. You laughed it off, or changed the subject, or just said nothing at all. You knew every patch, every stain, every repair your mom made after dinner. These clothes had been through it, just like you. And maybe they were not fashionable, maybe they sagged or pinched or hung wrong, but they lasted. And for families with more love than money, hand-me-downs were not second best. They were just what came next. And they carried you through, one button at a time. Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad, or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends, you collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. The miniature golf course with homemade obstacles was never part of a chain. It was part of someone's backyard that got out of hand. The fence leaned, the AstroTurf peeled at the corners, and the scorecards were photocopies from sometime around 1967. But to Dad, this was sacred ground. "Watch out for the windmill," he would say, pointing to a lopsided contraption that spun more out of habit than engineering. Hole 6 had a dinosaur, once green, now a sad grayish blue with a missing eye, and hole 9 was uphill into what looked like a mailbox from a sci-fi movie. Dad kept score with one of those tiny pencils, sometimes generous, sometimes forgetting that penalty stroke. He cheered every shot like you had just qualified for a Masters tournament, and when he sunk a hole in one, he would raise his hands like he had won a trophy. The best part? Ice cream sandwiches at the end, slightly melted from the cooler behind the counter. You never asked for anything more. But if the ground game was that magical, just wait until you went airborne, watching planes take off from a sleepy little airport that felt like your own private runway. Generic brand groceries were the quiet label of struggle in the 1980s. Walk into any store and you would see those plain white boxes with nothing but bold black lettering, cornflakes, macaroni, or just soup. No mascots, no cartoons, no sparkle. They sat on the bottom shelf like they were trying not to be noticed. But they were. Everyone saw them. Kids knew what they meant. If those showed up in your cart, you were not getting prizes in your cereal. You were just getting food. Some tasted okay. Some tasted like cardboard. But they filled the pantry. And that was the point. They were cheaper by quarters that mattered. Some families would peel off the labels just so the box did not scream. Others embraced them, one no-name can at a time. In school lunches, you hoped no one saw the off-brand cookies. You ate them fast, hoping they passed for the real thing. Generic brand groceries were not glamorous. They were not meant to be. but they were the invisible badge of getting by. And for the families that counted every dollar, those blank white labels were a quiet promise. You were doing what you could, and you were not alone. Generic brand groceries were the quiet label of struggle in the 1980s. Walk into any store and you would see those plain white boxes with nothing but bold black lettering, cornflakes, macaroni, or just soup. No mascots, no cartoons, no sparkle. They sat on the bottom shelf like they were trying not to be noticed. But they were. Everyone saw them. Kids knew what they meant. If those showed up in your cart, you were not getting prizes in your cereal. You were just getting food. Some tasted okay. Some tasted like cardboard. But they filled the pantry. And that was the point. They were cheaper by quarters that mattered. Some families would peel off the labels just so the box did not scream. Others embraced them, one no-name can at a time. In school lunches, you hoped no one saw the off-brand cookies. You ate them fast, hoping they passed for the real thing. Generic brand groceries were not glamorous. They were not meant to be. But they were the invisible badge of getting by. And for the families that counted every dollar, those blank white labels were a quiet promise. You were doing what you could, and you were not alone. Before TikTok dances. Before YouTube tutorials. There was a sidewalk, a stereo, and a kid spinning on cardboard like gravity had rules just for him. Breakdancing was not taught, it was born. From the cracked pavement of urban neighborhoods came something wild, fluid, and fearless. It did not ask for a stage, it made one. With every headspin, freeze, and windmill, breakdancers told their stories. No words, just rhythm, sweat, and defiance. It was not about money or fame, it was about respect, street cred, style. It started in the Bronx and echoed across the world. Suddenly, every town had a crew. Every school dance had a circle. You practiced until your elbows bled, because you had to nail that move. Then, slowly, it went mainstream. Adidas tracksuits, pop and lock TV specials. Corporate America tried to bottle the lightning. And while the world moved on to cleaner trends, the heartbeat of breakdancing never died. We forgot it for a while, like a song stuck at the bottom of a playlist. But for those who lived it, who felt the concrete scrape and the music hit, it was everything. When did we stop dancing like we had something to prove? We have just revisited the everyday 1980s moments that feel shocking now, so tell us in the comments which ones stunned you most. Give this video a like if it stirred your memory, and subscribe so you never miss our next trip back in time.